Yeah. I think you've got our bios. Does everybody have our bios? Everybody know who we are? Let's identify ourselves. Why don't you start off and I'll join in with you.
Ben Collins was in the Army for about 9 years, 9 and change, did most of it within Special Operations Command, was a Special Forces officer for years, so mostly from 2001 to 2009 during the war. So this is a topic that's something that we just kind of learned through doing in terms of trying to track these guys down. Since then, started a data and an analytics company. And I do the occasional commentary on Fox News on national security and all the rest of the issues. That's me.
I'm French Hill, and I'm in the Congress. I'm in my first term in Congress. I got elected in 2014. And before that, for 35 years, I was in business. I started and ran community banks in Arkansas, which is my home country. And I had the pleasure of working in the public sector twice before. I worked for President George H.W. Bush as an economic advisor in the White House.
I'm sorry, I really do need you to use the microphone.
Okay, yeah.
Because we are recording.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. That was the little man behind the curtain. It's such an informal group. I hate to be so formal. So I got elected to Congress in 2014, and before that I was in the commercial banking business and was an entrepreneur and started businesses in a number of different industries. But I did work for President Bush 41. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Treasury for corporate finance, and also worked in economic policy for President Bush. And one of the things that I enjoyed the most that really colors a lot of what I do in my work is I represented the United States when the Berlin Wall came down and helped design our economic assistance to Central and Eastern Europe in the banking and the central banking area. So it was very inspirational to me as a young man during Reagan to go behind Checkpoint Charlie in East Berlin and see what East Berlin was like under communism, and then come back to Central and Eastern Europe as a representative of President Bush after the wall came down. So that really colors a lot of my thinking about U.S. Foreign policy, as you can imagine. The reason I'm with you today to join Ben and talk about terrorism finance is that I'm on the House Financial Services Committee and on our terrorism financing task force. And our mission is to listen to the private sector, listen to our public sector leaders at the state and Treasury, and talk about ways that we can do a better job working with our allies to interdict terrorism finance. Because to defeat ISIS and to defeat Al-Qaeda and the Al-Qaeda derivatives around the world, we've got to use diplomatic, military, and financial weapons that we have in order to defeat this enemy. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I think I'll start out and just touch on these, Ben, and then we'll talk. Ben did a great job of putting up some points. You know, terrorism finance, we all think about it as Iran financing Hezbollah in Lebanon, or Syria, or Hamas in the West Bank, for example, and that would be state-sponsored terrorism. But what a lot of people don't know is that Hezbollah, for example, is involved with the drug trade in Latin America. They're involved in all kinds of illegal activities now. It's almost like illegal cartel-type activities in the drug trade or other illicit mafia-type activities have blended now and are part of terrorism finance. Everyone knows also from general reading about the role of charities, where we have transfers into the traditional Middle Eastern charity systems for terrorism money transfer. Front companies in the U.S. and around the world are a big concern to the Treasury, and the Treasury has a current rulemaking out trying to get at beneficial ownership of pass-through entities, for example. And this is an important area because in the U.S. we incorporate businesses in all 50 states. And those rules are very different in all 50 states. Some of them are automated. Some are not automated through the Secretary of State's office. Some of that data is paper-based still. And so to try to find out and network how a LLC or subchapter S pass-through type company is out there as a front company for illegal activity or terror activity is challenging in the United States compared to, say, our European peers that typically have a state incorporation statute and a state ownership statute that talks about that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, state sponsors of terror, whether it's Iran being one of the leaders of that. All these are traditional funding mechanisms, but what I think Ben and I in our discussion today, we're going to talk about, I'm going to stop here and let him talk, about non-bank finance and what we have to do working with our allies on that subject, because Al-Qaeda's and ISIS is a persistent threat, to quote Seth Jones at the Rand Corp. It is a persistent threat, and it's going to require us completely reevaluating our counterterrorism strategy. And in my judgment, the Obama administration, due to wishful thinking and characterizing certain people as the JV team, et cetera, has allowed our entire counterterrorism focus and analysis to atrophy, certainly since 2011. And so I think Ben, with his background and responsibility in mind, will make for interesting discussion as we go forward. Ben?
Good evening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about about kind of the non-traditional and ways that terror groups are able to finance and the way that they can move money for operations. Really for us, and I think you see this in both communications and banking, right? So the intelligence community is very good if we can get two people actually speaking to each other, right? If you get person A and person B on the phone and they're talking to each other, you've got the ability to interdict and step in the middle, and you can start your process there. With banking and finance, it's very much the same thing, and I think we've gone, at least certainly since 9/11, there have been a lot of effort that's been put on, at least on the banking side and the institutions, right? So if we've got person A and person B wiring money, again, there's a trail that's there that you can interdict if you understand one or both of the parties. Where it gets very difficult, obviously, and through communications, you guys have all heard about the way these guys talk to each other through third party. So first, let's just talk. We can describe ISIS. At least within the illegal activities, side that these guys do. ISIS kind of changed the game dramatically. So you almost, and if you look at the history of terror organizations that have access to funding, right? Look at something like FARC that used the cocaine trade for so many years. They were able to kind of perpetuate their operations. And so certainly ISIS in their land grab, they went after a lot of assets. So they went after the oil and gas assets. They went after a lot of the refineries. They also went after a lot of banks. So they were able to kind of steal the cash and the gold that existed in these banks. And that almost gave them a kind of a side way into the banking system as well, especially when they start using some of their partners like Syria. And we've seen, unfortunately, them try to use the banking system through Syria. Taxing their people, so they'll tax people for goods or services in the territory that they control. But that's a very specific piece, and so I think then if you have to broaden out and understand the difficulty of how innovative these guys have become when it comes to financing. So there is, if you're familiar with the system of Hawala, right, which is an ancient system of transferring money amongst, and started in the Islamic world around the 8th century. Are people familiar with Hawala or no? Okay, so this is essentially how it works. What's your name? Andrew. Okay, Andrew and Valerie. Andrew and Valerie. Okay, so here's how it works. So the congressman and I will be the Hawala brokers. So I'm in Iraq. He's in Pakistan. Andrew essentially comes to me in Iraq and says, I want to send some money to Valerie. And so you essentially give me the money. I put it in a little, in my book. I call up the congressman and I say, Andrew is making a transfer to Valerie. And then the congressman gives you the money that he asked for. but the money never transfers, right? So in Iraq, he gives me the cash. In Pakistan, he gives her the cash. So there's never an actual transfer of funds. And it's built on an honor system. So, biannually or annual basis, the congressman and I will sit down in, some cafe somewhere, and we'll look at our ledgers. And through the year, he gave out 800, I gave out 1,000, he owes me $200, that kind of thing, right? But the point here is that it's a system that negates their necessity to actually transfer funds from bank to bank, right? There's no record of it. It's anonymous. That's an 8th century system, right? Fast forward to something that we're familiar with today, which is Bitcoin, which is something that's come on to into our world. Again, Bitcoin's a very decentralized, anonymous currency that has a lot of the same attributes. So, the point is you literally have some very complex but some simple ways. Take something like that all the way to, where literally they will find somebody on the internet that is a friend, and they will convince that person somewhere in Michigan or Alabama or wherever to essentially go out and buy a prepaid phone card, right? So somebody in Syria is chatting through some of the social networks with somebody in the U.S., and they'll convince them to go buy a $30 phone card, and then they'll call them up on Skype or whatever and say, here are the numbers to the $30 phone card. And then that guy will essentially go and sell that phone card for $20, and he'll have cash in hand. Right, so there are ways that they can circumvent the traditional system of how we interdict from a digital sense to move money around, and I think that's, and then I think, sir, if I can go into the cost.
Sure.
And really, what's kind of shocking is, so. Obviously, this ISIS claimed to have $2 billion in 2014. I think at max they're up to $1 million a day or $2 million a day based on oil. But we've done a lot in terms of interdicting their oil infrastructure, and especially with the price of oil tanking, it's definitely, at least I certainly hope it's not up to $1 million a day anymore. But if you take a look at the cost of terror attacks, that to me that's the most worrisome thing is that it doesn't cost a lot, right? A horrible pun, bang for your buck, but something like 9/11 and the complexities of that in terms of moving people and getting them trained and housing and all of that, 500,000. All the way down to you look at something like London that was the train bombing, or Paris that we all just witnessed a couple months ago, 10,000. So it's very, very cheap. Right? It doesn't take a whole lot of money for these guys to be able to put together some basic things that they can get on the black market, or as we'll talk a little bit later, they can get at Home Depot or Walmart. So, my biggest concern is, especially as tactically ISIS is starting to lose on the battlefield, and it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter for them. Yes, they're weaning on cash because they have to pay their fighters. But if they're intelligent about it, if they've been strategic the way Al-Qaeda was strategic, and they moved money around into places all over, they've probably been able to move some money into pockets, around Europe and unfortunately, I think in the U.S. And you can just see that, essentially it doesn't cost that much. They don't need that much money for them to elicit an attack.
I think that what's interesting about ISIS is it's really essentially the first transnational criminal state. I mean, you have the FARC was in Colombia. You can think about that. You can think about state sponsors of terrorism that we know of and have identified over the years, like Iran. But ISIS is now multi-territorial, and so to me it's the first transnational criminal state. Recently, as Ben alluded to, we've had some success in interdicting terror finance. I've said since San Bernardino and Paris, we've had a dramatic change in this administration's targeting in financial targets, something that many of us have called for months. For example, he mentioned about $1 million a day at last summer's prices on oil. The trade between Raqqa, Syria, and Mosul was 25,000 trucks a day made that transit route. But the administration did not interdict that oil, stop it in any way until the Kurds and Americans retook Sinjar province. just coincidentally around the time of the San Bernardino and Paris attacks, just shortly thereafter. And we began taking out the oil tanker trucks, which is one of the largest daily sources of money for the support of ISIS in its territory. But you have to think about something that Americans can't think about, but almost $100 million in antiquities have been taken by ISIS and have put on the black market. You've got a black market gold trade back through Turkey, kidnapping for ransom, which has led to human trafficking, slavery, part of, in my judgment, genocide against non-Sunni Muslims in that territory. All this is in the effort of generating substantial funds for ISIS, in addition to, tackling the banks in Mosul and in Raqqa. So it's really amazing to me what's happened. And I think it's now that the rules of engagement will allow us to interdict that, including taking out the CFO of ISIS in Syria and the CFO of ISIS in Iraq, and taking out a warehouse filled with currency in Iraq. These are things that we could have been doing since 2011 and did not do, in my judgment, a mistake, but that we are doing now. I want to be on record saying, good. I mean, this is what we need to be doing. You've got to have, I believe that financial targets should be special operations and military targets. One other point about funding, and this gets and links this back to the Iranian agreement, is this frees up Iran's frozen assets around the world. The newspaper number is approximately $100 billion for public consumption. But more importantly, it puts the Iranians back into international commerce, back into the banking system, the Quds Force, back into international commerce, back into the banking system, essentially without limitation as a part of the Iranian negotiation. So why are we talking about these kind of numbers? Because you could rebuild all domestic infrastructure needs in Iran and still have tremendous resources to carry out this kind of mayhem in the region, because any one of these attacks can be done in a modest way if you're talking about a terror attack. It obviously takes more money to put people in the field, which ISIS has in both Syria and Iraq. So let me stop there, and you want to turn subjects. Yeah, maybe switch subjects. Then we'll take questions.
So this is going to go into, now these are obviously a little bit, these are some averages here, but I mean, this is, if you take something like the Paris attacks, this is, and remember, we put that price up to, 10,000. And a lot of that is resources. You can see at least in terms of black market, right? So this spans Europe to Middle East, and these are obviously high-low kind of averages. But still, you think about if somebody's got a couple $1,000, they can go out and buy a couple of AKs and a couple of grenades, and the amount of damage that they can do. And the one that to me really ties it kind of ties a lot of this together. TATP, right? So TATP is the type of explosives that were used in the Paris suicide vests, right? Literally, you can go onto YouTube, and in about 5 minutes, you can learn how to make TATP, right? It's hydrogen peroxide, acetone, and hydrochloric acid, right? So Kmart and Home Depot, and there you go. Literally takes you a couple hours, a couple $100, and you can make it in a bathtub. How do you track that, right? I mean, that's cash these guys are using to just go and get this stuff and make it in their bathtub. The scary thing about Paris is that TATP is very, very, very unstable, right? So it's not like C4. C4 you can like light on fire and it's not going to explode, or you can jump up and down on it and it won't explode. If you light it on fire and jump on down, I wouldn't do that. It's like heat and pressure, right? But it's very stable. This is very unstable. So what was the shocking thing for me, at least, about Paris was that they built 7 or 8 of these vests, right, in their bathtub in somebody's apartment, and every single one of them worked exactly the way they were supposed to. That's scary, right, because this stuff is so unstable that to me, it speaks of the level of expertise that they have, right? So again, cost, right? They've got to move these experts into the European countries, which they already have done already, but there's a cost that's associated with it. And so when we start talking about interdiction, right, this is where finance and communication and a lot of the security versus privacy conversations that we have all the time and we should have, start to interdict on the tactical side in the military with the political environment. So on the military side, I think a lot of us have read about the rules of engagement being so tight, and the congressman mentioned that. 75% of the planes, I think, were coming back without dropping their ordnance on those trucks because the rules of engagement were so tight. And so from my perspective, operationally, the CFO, Abu Sayyaf, I think in May of 15, went into a raid, special operations, and we grabbed their CFO. Now imagine the type of information that guy had, at least within his computer, or his phone, or paperwork. So where I start really looking at this from a political perspective is you have to have the understanding that the rules of engagement have to allow our soldiers and special operations to be able to conduct those operations, learn as much as they can, literally on target, and then to have the freedom of maneuver to go hit 4 more targets that night or 5 more targets that night. Because the guy's got he's got a roster of people that he's working with, and I guarantee you somebody outside his house probably was on a cell phone saying the Americans just showed up and it's not pretty. We have to have the loose, enough of a trust system within the rules of engagement that our guys can go and go and go and go. Because within 48 hours, that stuff is almost immaterial, at least what they're finding on those targets. So information, money, rules of engagement, all of that, I think, have to be brought together in some semblance to understand this stuff doesn't cost that much. They can learn how to build it on the internet. And so we have to really get serious about it. And we've started to, but as the congressman said, we're a couple years late. And then, sir, I think at least the three. I mean, I always look militarily in terms of strategic, operational, and tactical, right? And strategic is that those diplomatic efforts to bring pressure on banks and state actors, but then it's all the way down to the tactical. And until we actually have, I think, a cohesive strategy from strategic down to operational down to tactical, they're still going to find ways to get around it. So,
What's the next slide?
That's it, sir. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'll make a couple of comments about that strategic pressure and then take questions if everybody's okay with that. I use that strategic pressure, whether it's in the Bush administration or the Obama administration, has been very challenging because everyone here knows that, for example, the Gulf states, Qatar and Kuwait particularly, are known supporters of Sunni Muslim terrorist activity in Iraq and Syria. And that's obviously a great frustration to Americans, American taxpayers, American strategic advisors, our State Department, our Pentagon. But we can't give up in terms of identifying those people and being very public in that if we identify somebody in one of those countries and they've signed the Jeddah Communique with us, which means that they are cooperating in the war on terrorism in this theater against ISIS, that goes with not only military support, but it goes with the intellectual support and the criminal support. So we need to set those expectations, and we need to just persistently attempt to enforce them, is the way I would describe it, and the United Nations as well. Likewise, we need, if they don't have good custom procedures in these countries, if they don't have good referral and extradition laws, we need to help obtain those. And I know that sounds bureaucratic, but when we find a bad actor, we want them arrested. And that's why I've been a big supporter of what do we do when we have an important intelligence asset captured in the field. In my view, that's one of the benefits of having the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay. It is a safe, secure place off American shore that we've spent millions of dollars creating a Department of Justice level federal incarceration facility, and we have a global courtroom there that's bar none the best in the federal justice system. And In Ben's example, while the CFO in Syria was killed in that special forces attack, his spouse was captured, and she was a very good intelligence resource. And I think that speaks so highly of our men in the special forces because from an intelligence point of view, to interdict terror finance, that human capital deployed in a special forces operation, in my judgment, whether it's our special forces or an allied country's special forces, is the best way to achieve our goals. Why? Because we actually get intelligence in that process, whether it's laptops you've seen recently in the press, the declassification of bin Laden's treasure trove. And so that has value to our allied nations in blocking and identifying patterns of terrorist behavior and financing behavior. In the case of the CFO over in Iraq, that was a drone strike, which, obliterated whatever was available there. So I think how we use this, how we structure the rules of engagement are so important with our allies in order to create the intelligence network to be good at interdiction of terror finance. So I think the purpose of what we've tried to communicate today is that it's more than just banking and the international wire transfer system and trying to interact organized crime that has rings of either drug or other commodity transfers from Latin America and the U.S. into Africa and up into the Middle East. It's a lot more than that. It's about what are the customs rules in Turkey? How are they enforced? How are we working with our allies in the region to block legitimate transfers of money that fund terrorism? How do we use diplomacy to do that? And how do we get them to comply? So these are some of the big challenges in this area, and I think we're ready for your questions. Don't be bashful.
I had a question. You had the slide ago about how cheap a lot of the big spectacular terrorist attacks.
For the cost?
Yeah.
Come
Yeah.
use the mic.
And I recognize that there's a certain level of truth to that. However, and maybe I've been reading, I haven't read enough about the way things have changed recently in the recent attacks. I mean, with Al-Qaeda, for example, bin Laden built up a network over a decade and before 9/11, and literally had people on payrolls all over the world for long periods of time. Obviously, it costs a whole lot more. And I recognize it's not always the case in every terrorist attack, but because a lot of times you do have networks like that, the individual attack might be cheap, but the larger network is not. I guess, how does that factor into strategies to attack them?
How does that factor into strategies to target them?
Yes.
Well, it's almost made more, it's harder because they've gone down to like a microcellular level, right? So Al-Qaeda had its cells and they put together a network, but there was still an overarching organizational structure.
And that doesn't really exist anymore?
Well, if you ask them, they would probably say it exists, right? I'm saying if you ask Baghdadi, but the fact of the matter is it's been decentralized to these small nodes where guys are running 3 or 4 or 5 people, right? I guarantee you that the guy, I can't remember his name, but the guy in Paris that, remember, they chased through and they finally got the next day, he was the guy that they had moved from Syria up to Paris. I guarantee he had a lot more operational authority, right, in terms of planning and funding and getting the money than somebody under bin Laden's day would have, right? And part of that is under necessity. Because as much as authority if I can give you, then that means you don't have to call me all the time, right? That's how we got so many of bin Laden's lieutenants in that architecture, was they still had to get permission, right? So there was a lot of communications traffic. ISIS figured out, or at least Baghdadi figured out and understood that, look, I've got to train you and I've got to trust you, but I'm going to give you a basic, training module when you're with me in Raqqa, but then you're gone, right? So you're going to have a number of methods that you could try to get some of this cash, right? You're going to go with cash, but we can use the Hawala system, or we can use, sell counterfeit goods or whatever. So it's almost like they're seeding, at least through talent or through skill, talent, and trust. But you almost have to be like an entrepreneur yourself once you get there, right? And I think that makes it a lot more difficult. But I mean, as a matter of fact, and Al-Qaeda was so good, right? I mean, I forget the exact number, at least in terms of on 9/11. But the guys that were over here, they had access to $500,000 in cash, right? That's what was they could utilize. But a couple days before 9/11, they actually transferred money back to Al Qaeda. They said, look, we didn't use 36 grand or something like that, and they wired it back. Very efficient in that sense. But I think that has a much more formal structure than what you'll find today.
Yeah, I think this gives you a feel for that base operational concern. I think all of our allies are concerned about is the low cost of a field activity. But ISIS is, as pointed out, accumulated through oil sales, bankrupt, $2 billion. They're running as I say, a transnational criminal operation, totally based on a military strategy. They're funding activities in Libya. They're funding activities throughout the region. And now people are attaching themselves to the banner of ISIS. And so the fragmentation is an operational benefit to them in many ways. And it also makes our job tougher in some ways, but also easier in some ways, because by definition, a fragmented network, while it's dispersed, is also easy to spot each spot and attempt to eliminate it. So fragmentism in the counterterrorism arena here, I think, cuts both ways. What's happening right now in Libya is a classic case of the errors in the Obama administration in their foreign policy as it relates to counterterrorism. You may remember that under the Bush administration, with Secretary Rice, Libya agreed to give up its nuclear weapons, completely dismantled, shipped out of the country, and as a part of that negotiation, paid all the Lockerbie arrears that had been adjudicated in international courts to the victims of the Lockerbie situation up front. And we left Libya, stable and ready to go to the next step. And by Europe, I want to credit, we can't blame just the United States, Europe and the U.S.'s diplomatic and strategic errors, Libya is now the hotbed of ISIS development. And it's just, in this administration, for me, radio silence since that effort began to unravel. And I've seen no plan in place to counter it. And likewise, the lack of a status of forces agreement and some plan for working with the Iraqi government left open a vacant space that allowed ISIS to explode across the border from Syria into Iraq. So when you don't have a strategy, you don't have leadership from the U.S., you don't have our allies working together, you have these vacuums, and these networks, these terror networks, blossom there. And I mean, literally, Libya is an ungovernable place now. They're in control of the oil fields there. And the ports. So leadership is critical here, but we cannot, no matter what our strategy is, a vacuum is not an acceptable place because it allows this terrorism element to blossom.
Yes, sir.
Question, there's a documentary coming up called in Mexico, Cartel Land. I don't know if you've seen it. When you see what's happening down there in terms of the drugs they're bringing up here, it's surprising to me that the Al-Qaedas aren't down in Mexico in the process of infiltrating here. I'm puzzled as to why we haven't had more attacks than we have, because you keep talking about it over there.
Yeah.
It's about ready to happen here.
Well, we can talk extensively about border security here, and that's a good topic. In our committee work, we have, and it's public record, extensive connections between the South American drug trade and their proceeds and Hezbollah, where they are in sync, and that is helping fund literally terrorist activity in Lebanon and the West Bank through their connection with organized crime in South America. So that bridge has been crossed and is on the public record. And I find that, a really, really negative development. Obviously, we have spent so many billions of dollars working to interdict the drug trade over the past 3 decades that we have good referral sources and good sources of information in Latin America, and that is not a recent development, but it's one that I find sobering because it could lend itself, obviously, to an organized effort, from
Cartel Land,
right.
documentary.
Yeah, I've seen the teasers. I have not seen it, but I look forward to it. Yeah.
And you're right, those route lines are established, or the logistic routes, I mean, that cartels have been using for years and years and years.
I can't, this story is not new either, and Ben certainly knows it, but as a banker who comes to Congress, I've been in Congress 1 year, this was new to me. So there's no bigger business in the U.S. than used cars, right? Every frigging town has many, used car lots, pay here, buy here, and so one of the biggest sources of terror money is laundering U.S. used automobile sales. Again, public record, we can, if you'll email my office, we can send you the testimony on it or point you on the internet where you can read about it. But it was chilling to see used cars being basically vacuumed up in America, legitimately purchased by somebody, they thought, and being sold to a wholesaler who puts them on a barge and they go to West Africa, where satellite photography shows, acres and acres and acres and acres of autos that are then sold for a price, and it's that cash that is then integrated into the terror finance network, into the Horn of Africa and North Africa trade. And I mean, that's something that, you couldn't, an American just wouldn't, that thought would never come to them. And so we had a hearing earlier about legitimate trade being converted to cash. This is either undercharging or overcharging in a normal export-import bill of lading, but by a criminal element who takes that cash and converts it to terrorism. Now, in America, we have an automated customs system, and those commercial transactions coming by train or by ship or by truck into the United States, we have a fairly good way of testing. This says that it's supposed to be a container of Sanyo TVs in boxes, let's say. And we x-ray that, and we also know what that weighs. And, we have measures. But many countries in the world don't have that kind of a systemic and sustained and intelligent customs organization. And so it's very easy to essentially launder money that way. And that's terrorism finance by trade. And one that is what I would consider an emerging area that analysts in our intelligence organizations are just now trying to learn about, and then trying to go out to our colleagues around the world in Asia and Europe and in Africa and come up with ways to,
Gemstones.
Yeah, please.
Well, sir, I'm sure you know a lot more, but they've been doing it with diamonds and gemstones, because it's very, it's a small thing, and they launder it essentially, but they can basically take it to I think Amsterdam or Brussels. One of those was a hub for years, and I know, Al-Qaeda, as a matter of fact, was using a lot of the gemstone trade to launder their money and to move it, because it's a lot easier just take a little bag, a couple of stones. But again, it's that point where the legal and the illegal start to become murky.
Right. Another topic, yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Chris Larson, and Ben, thanks for your service. I was
You're welcome, sir.
With 10th Special Forces Group and 19th Group, and so
Thank you, sir.
I know what you've gone through to get there. I just want to ask you, both of you, sir, if you could plan and execute and had a commander-in-chief that was both competent and courageous to give you the permission to take out ISIS, how would you go about doing that? In Rogers.
He wants this complete open field of rules of engagement.
Just that? That's it?
It's a 72-hour deal for him. It's no big.
Look, I honestly, here's what I think. Number one, you have to come up with there has to be a plan, and we've talked about it a little bit, strategic, tactical, strategic, operational, and tactical, right? We've gotten very good at winning battles as soldiers in special operations, but we just don't win wars anymore. right? So, and what gets talked and bandied about in the press is always tactics, right? 800 soldiers in Afghanistan or 500 special operators, da-da-da-da-da. That's easy. I mean, easier, right? I mean, that's the easy part. Kicking in doors, we got that. We've figured that part out. It's what happens after that day for me, which I think is the biggest question. And hopefully we've learned some lessons, from Iraq and Afghanistan. In terms of that tactical solution, to me, it's the fact that we still, there is a logistics train, right? Those lines of communication in terms of soldiers and money and weaponry that still is going back and forth between Raqqa and Mosul in Iraq. I mean, those two things have to be, completely interdicted. I mean, you have to stop their ability to recruit and move guys left and right. Turning off their money. I mean, these are all things that we can slowly chip away. And I mean, a lot of reports I've been seeing, I mean, ISIS is doing, I mean, they're not doing great financially. Their soldiers are deserting. They can't really pay these guys anymore. I think it's going to get to this point where they will splinter, right? But already we know that groups like al-Nusra and others are now just as scary. But again, from that tactical side, interdict, cut off their funding. And yes, I know people don't want to hear it, but you're going to have to kill a lot of bad guys. That's the necessity. To that question, then, who does it? Right? I mean, I think that's a question for the American people in terms of what are the American people willing to put up with? Because I can tell you that we're not going to have, this isn't just a 20,000 special operations. Senator Graham said he was going to put in 5,000 special operators, right, if he got elected. Well, we have a tooth-to-tail ratio. For every trigger puller, there's 4 or 5 guys behind that are bringing in fuel and food and medical and da-da-da. So the necessity here, at least, would be a massive, massive American footprint. I don't think the American people are willing to do that. I can say that I think that nobody else can lead battles and wars like Americans. Nobody can. And look, we've spent a lot of money over the years, training a lot of these different countries, UAE and Jordan and the rest. I think America can and should lead that effort, right, from a command and control perspective. Because right now you've got French, well, not Canadian, they left, right? But you've got 8 different countries' planes all flying in the same airspace. I mean, to me, that's just, it's a madhouse. But to me, I'm just going to go back to saying what happens that day after, right? The day after you've managed to beat their army on the field, what's going to happen? And I think I tend to, unfortunately, get a little bit, where I make a mistake sometimes is I start going down there's a reason why Syria is. It's destroyed right now. I mean, their GDP is crashed. I mean, there's nothing that's going to flourish in the next 10 to 15 years. It's going to take them 30 years to get their economy, and that's if they start getting it right. So who's going to be that stabilizing force again? I don't think Americans should or could do it. So,
No, I think you summarized it well, and you've spoken to the point of if you take territory, who's going to hold the territory? And so in Mosul, we're getting ready to have a major combined assault between the Iraqis and the Peshmerga forces to take back Mosul. And there, the Kurds are going to hold Mosul. So there's a post, in my judgment, in northern Iraq, as they've worked their way down, once we've stopped the finance, we're choking off ISIS there, led by the Kurd forces that took Sinjar. They'll take Mosul. It'll be a long struggle. When I think about the bravery of the American Army and Marine Corps in Fallujah, I can't remember the difference in size, but I think Mosul's at least twice as large as Ramadi or Fallujah. This is a major undertaking, and the Iraqis have the point on that with the Peshmerga forces, which is encouraging their working together for a common cause. But post taking Mosul, what is the administration of that to keep it safe and allow commerce to come back because it's an incredibly important city in the north. So, but good question. I think I couldn't agree. The summary of what does one do and how do you administer that is so important. Somewhat easier, honestly, in Iraq than in what's happened in Libya. And this is the big question over in Syria because it relates to what? Assad. but it affects everyone in the world because of the pitiful conditions in Syria that have everyone on the march as a refugee. No electricity today, according to news reports, in the whole country. Yes, sir.
This is kind of branching off that. Obviously, since we did leave Iraq and we did form there, a lot of ISIS leadership is made out of the Ba'ath Party, which was a lot of leadership in that area. After we removed ISIS, I guess my question is, obviously it's going to probably take U.S. forces. What sort of leadership do we sponsor there, knowing that the current Iraqi regime had this happen under them? So what sort of leadership do we sponsor in that area?
Well, there's hope in the new leadership in Baghdad that they will get it right this time after the failed previous government. And it's, there's no confidence that that is a certainty, but there is hope that it will pull together. But I think you're going to see struggles.
There's something that we can't.
There's no magic formula for the U.S.
No, there isn't, and we're not going to. We can't solve it, right? We tried, and it didn't work. But the fact of the matter is, to me, it's just the concentric problems that make this so complex, right? And to me, it really does focus down on that sectarian divide, right, between Sunni and Shia. And you're right, the the Baathists, right? And I mean, a lot of those senior Baathists were, they were trained by like Stasi, right? The East German police and the KGB. I mean, it goes back that far. But the fact that you have Saudi Arabia and Iran, right, essentially utilizing these different players on the battlefield as proxies, honestly, I can't. At least in Iraq, Mosul, you're talking about heart of kind of Sunni right now with a Shia-led country who has shown time and time again that they will, they'll fall back to their sectarian animosity. That's their, and look in Syria. You're talking about again, Alawites, Shia. You've got literally, I think they make up 7% of the population. Right? With the ability to, that's essentially ruling the 80 to 90% Sunni. So there is a lot of pent up, and a lot of it real anger. And I'll tell you, Baghdadi and ISIS, they've done a great job, essentially, of messaging what's real and what's implied. And unfortunately, because I think the U.S. just didn't, and Obama didn't engage, and with a clear, concise policy. That they took advantage of it, and it played right into ISIS's hands. Watching us do a deal with Iran, right? Pushing our weapons and money through Baghdad. And where do you think that went? That went to the Shia militias. It didn't go to the Sunnis that we were supposed to be working with.
Yes, ma'am.
On that vein, with ISIS, even if we went in and got rid of ISIS physically and militarily in their location, my issue is the stealth part of the jihad with ISIS and Muslim Brotherhood and all these other organizations and how they're getting food to people on the computer. We might be able to get rid of them physically for one portion of it, but they're still everywhere else. Their tentacles are reaching throughout the world. Do you think if we went in militarily with a bunch of other countries that we could really get rid of them anyway?
Well, you've got this vacuum issue I talked about in Libya, for example. And, in Libya, you've got terrific ISIS recruiting and buildup of activity. There's no Shia in North Africa to speak of. So this is a Sunni recruiting effort, and they're gathering and building an effort there, and yet they don't have per se, they have different tribes and a little bit of cultural variation there, but it's not a Shia-Sunni split there, and yet it's still vigorous and growing. We have stood up cyber warfare. I think, again, late, not an Obama comment, just a structural bureaucracy comment about Western governments that is now at work. I think that's a good thing. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of going to a contest that Facebook sponsored with the Department of State for college kids around the world on how they would recommend that we counter terrorism recruiting on the internet. super interesting to me, an area I'm keenly interested in. I'm proud Facebook was involved in it. I appreciate the Department of State being a leader in it. What was fun for me is the 3 finalists were the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, in my hometown, a university in Finland, and a university in Kuwait, which is the ultimate irony based on our discussion today. So these are young people out taking the battle out to the internet. And I think, first of all, I love the creativity of it. And I love the fact that we're engaging young people to talk about how we've got to stop this. I mean, and one way to do it is to reduce radicalization on the internet, which is something, you know, those of us over a certain age, I can't be radicalized by anything, much less the internet, you know. And yet, in my own hometown, we had a terrorist attack. 2 of our young military recruiters in '09 were out on a smoke break, standing in front of their Strip Center Army recruiting station in Little Rock, and a young man from Memphis, Tennessee, who'd been radicalized on the internet, who had traveled to Yemen. How his parents didn't know this, I don't know, this was an adult young person who worked in his dad's dry cleaning business in Memphis. And his father had said, why don't you go to Little Rock and see if we could get some dry cleaning businesses started there. This was a stable, good old American family. And this young man was radicalized, and he walked up and shot these 2 men at point-blank range on a smoke break, killing one of them instantly, and the other one, who I was a pleasure to present a Purple Heart to, since we got the Pentagon to agree that you can earn a Purple Heart in the United States if you're attacked by Islamic extremists. Very sad for me to see that, and this is just a normal town in America. It didn't get the press that it got a lot of press when it happened, but that's a long time ago. And yet, this is at the heart of that particular attack in the U.S. was internet radicalization, reading texts online.
These 3 universities, what were their key ideas of how they help get rid of radicalization online?
Yeah, it's about the interdiction and engagement aspect in social media. And Mike, can we give them the Facebook website, you know, give her something to go?
7 Strong. Go search 7 Strong on Facebook. You can find the kids in Little Rock.
Yeah, 7 Strong, and then that'll lead you into the contest. I like it because, as I say, it engages our country, and part of what I think all of us want who serve our country in government or in our military, we want our nation engaged in this struggle emotionally, and we want, you know, that help. But we need that. Our men and women in uniform need that, and that's why I commend this work. Yes, ma'am.
Why don't we arm the Kurds more formally? And what will the Kurdish state? They have been promised that since 1921.
Right. Look how far away he moves from the microphone. Well, I do believe that you know, we should arm the Kurds. They are one of the fighting forces engaged in this struggle that deliver, that show amazing success, and I must say have a significant female component to their military forces. So I do support arming the Kurds and supporting their efforts on behalf, though, of the coalition's mission. You know, not, yeah, you know, in a coordinated manner. And as it relates to the state solution that they've wanted long before World War I think that's something that's part of the political settlement that really Ben and I are talking about. What does one do if one has military success? How do we achieve civilian governance in these troubled areas? And we can't do that. The United States worked hard during the Bush administration and frankly in the early days of the Obama administration to achieve civilian control over what we think of as the Iraqi territory, and it just plain didn't stick for oil sharing revenue reasons, and as we've talked about, the sectarian aspect of it. And yet some accommodation must happen, and it's got to involve the neighbors, and think about how complex the neighborhood is on behalf of of that area. So I, for one, don't have the solution, but I know that a solution is essential to a commercial, peaceful part of what we call northern Iraq. And you've served. Talk about how you feel about that.
Well,
Because
look, to me, I think, at least when it comes to the Kurds, I mean, we have, at least the U.S., we don't have a great history, right, with actually following through and I think it really comes down to the fact, in short, it was Turkey, right? We were launching planes off of ships, and that round-trip flight to actually bomb ISIS was, a couple hours maybe, right? Until we made the deal to be able to fly out of Incirlik. And they've always used that as a political football for us. I mean, they did it in the 12th hour before the Iraq War, I think both times. Right? I mean, exactly. They know what they're doing in that sense. And Turkey's a NATO partner, right? So when you start doing, Turkey, NATO, now Russia, Putin, right, and he's basically encircled Turkey around Syria and Armenia. I mean, you're now talking about NATO, and you're talking about EU, and I mean these issues that are so massive. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times the Kurds, the Kurds don't have, they don't have a multi-billion-dollar lobbying effort that's going on. At least I don't think so. But if in that sense, right? But I think if ever there was a time that they've earned their way in this, it's certainly right now. And I hope that we take note of that and insist. And this is not my concern here, and this I think goes to your question as well, is that. This is a global jihadist threat, right? This goes back a very long time. I think the only continent that we haven't seen activity is Antarctica, and that's probably because it's not conducive for a lot of the activities, right? Nobody really wants to go down there. But the fact of the matter is we had, something like 100 countries last year alone that there were attacks. 100 countries, and casualties were up 80%. So to me, I look at my concern, right? Get away from yes, obviously we're all concerned about what's occurring and can we track these guys down before they pull off, one of these effects again. But this is something that's multi-generational, right? And it has to be diplomatic, intelligence, military, and economic. But the political aspect is where I'm afraid, because you look at something like the Cold War strategy, right? Now, plus or minus, and you can debate whether or not that was a good strategy or not strategy, but we based it off the domino theory, right? One country falls to communism, they're all going to start falling, right? So we had the Cold War strategy. That lasted Eisenhower to Reagan, 7 presidents, right? I think 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats. Imagine that in today's environment, right, where a strategy, now, granted, they moved things operationally, guys put different spin on it, but that was a military, diplomatic, and economic effort that spanned 7 presidents, right? To me, I think we need to have a Cold War-esque, right, size strategic strategy to defeat global jihad. My fear is, people either pull left or pull right on a subject based on a 2-year or 4-year electoral cycle. Right? I mean, can we honestly see a plan that's going to go through 1 president, 2 presidents, 3 presidents? Because if we don't have a strategy that we actually kick in for the next 10, 15 years, I think we're going to be chipping away at it piecemeal. But
yes, sir.
I just had a quick comment and then a question. But Congressman, you mentioned the private vehicle sales. I think there was a business owner in Texas that sold his work truck and bought a new one.
it was a plumber.
It was a plumber?
It was a plumber,
Yeah.
and it was a picture on ISIS, right? And it showed the ISIS guys driving down some road in Iraq, and it had like A1 Tom's Plumbing.
Yeah.
And poor Tom got a phone call.
Poor guy's still paying the insurance on it too.
My question was, what currency are they using in most of these cases, and can you use exchange to track how some of that changes hands?
What currency are they using?
Like, you saw those pictures of the big explosion of cash in the air.
Yeah.
Are these guys using dollars, or are they?
They're using kind of all of the above, and you may have seen recent press reports of Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary for President Clinton, suggested the other day in a speech that, we eliminate the manufacture of $100 bills. And in Europe, the EU's been debating eliminating the 500 euro note. I'd argue some caution there, because if you're a criminal, you've got access to diamonds, small, Bitcoin. I mean, they're going to find a way around it. But So there is cash involved. There's Turkish money, there's Iraqi dinars, there's euros, there's U.S. currency. I mean, it's whatever they've got. Whatever was in those banks, they've been spending, and they adjust the exchange rate based on what they're doing. But they also do a lot of commodity-to-commodity swap, big time, or converting commodities to cash into another country. And also this, as I say, this terrorist finance by trade is big as well. So. Hard to track. You know, more than 50% of the quantity of American $100 bills is outside the United States, and has been for many, many years. And that's why Larry Summers gave his talk as a former Treasury Secretary. He knows that, and he wonders, you know, if we need it in this country. And I just would caution people about telling everyone in America that the only way you can do a financial transaction is electronically. I'm old-fashioned enough and have been a banker long enough to know that I'm not 100%, that there's not pain or crime-free electronic transactions. And we see that all the time and concerned about our privacy data. So to take away, the ability to use currency, if you want to use currency for your own purposes, is, I'm not sure I'm sold on that. But I think Larry is smart to bring the challenge up. But I don't think that stops the criminal in Latin America or the criminal in the Middle East from doing what he needs to do. It's just not going to happen. So.
And ISIS has their own currency.
Right.
With their own exchange rate.
They do?
Yeah, they've got their own currency. Yep.
Just one more point. I know you are concerned about the lack of leadership with presidents, but how much of the problems you put on the senior military leaders as far as lack of leadership there?
Well, I think you've seen some senior military leaders not stay in command. And I'll kind of leave it at that. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you, partner.
sir.
You bet. Appreciate you.